Hello everyone, this is part 22 of What If Naruto Was a Puppeteer, and I hope you guys enjoy this video and to like, to subscribe, and check out the playlist, to see more comment down below. Now let's start the intro.
They call me a god. They call me a god. They call me a god.
Naruto leaned back on the comfortable cushions that surrounded the low, gilded table made of deep mahogany. It alone probably cost as much as he would make on an A-ranked mission, and Ayumi was currently using it to perform her little show on. He had to admit, she had gotten quite good with the little marionettes, able to make the finely crafted figures move with the fluid graces. She, of course, wasn't using chakra threads to move them, but more conventional strings attached to a rather complex paddle. Instead of just moving the control bar around on its various axes, certain strings were threaded through the paddle and attached to little loops that were set at different lengths on her fingers. It allowed her a finer degree of control over the little puppets, a young geisha-painted lady and a kabuki-disguised prince, enacting a famous courtly love story. When Ayumi set her mind to something, she certainly went all out. It was almost a shame she didn't have chakra, but there was a definite stigma about that sort of thing in noble spheres. Besides, she was beyond the age where a civilian could safely awaken her chakra, so it was a moot point. Although, if the rumors about her parentage turned out to be true, it might be a different story. Still, she would be fearsome enough even without it in a few years, if she could apply this single-minded determination to everything she did. So, nothing unusual over the last few months or weeks? He asked, absently casting out some invisible strings and forcing one of her other figures to leap to life, a rather cliché ninja, complete with baggy black pants and a cowl face mask combination. It took a running leap from its shelf, landing in a textbook roll next to the princely puppet and placing a little wooden kunai to his neck. Ayumi grinned at the sight. To her eyes it simply looked like the little figure had come alive. Define unusual, sensei. I've told you before, I'm not your sensei. My actual student takes offense to it, as I'm sure you can imagine. She waved him off airily, eyes scrunching up in concentration as the little princess puppet fell to her knees, pleading silently with the ninja. An affectation, as we both know. I call all my tutors sensei. Only to their faces, as we both know, he shot back, earning a smirk. But you will have to be more specific. My days are filled with tedium and anything that you might call unusual, I simply see as interesting. The princely puppet abruptly twirled away from the ninja, shedding his disguise as a ruse to escape. New faces, any particularly disturbing court gossip, people acting out of character. Well, she snorted, still managing to make it sound dignified somehow, if you can discount my father. I had hoped his little pity party after that horrible beast of a woman finally passed would clear up months ago. As it is, I'm waiting for him to catch sight of his latest beau any day now. I must have underestimated how infatuated he was with that blubbery conniver, heavens only knew why. She gave him a sidelong glance as the ninja crouched low to the ground, passing his little kunai back and forth between hands that should have been incapable of such fine movement. But you need not worry about my father. The reason for the enmity between Konoha and the 12 Guardians escapes me, but they do have his protection firmly in mind. No Fire Country daimyo has been successfully assassinated since the founding of your village. And the Guardians themselves? Naruto asked. She rolled her eyes at his obvious suspicion, but humored him nevertheless as she directed her little prince to draw a katana from his side. Mikaku is as stately as ever, you know how those monks are. Tayuya is surly, but capable, we don't have cause to talk much, and Hanryo is their most recent addition, by all accounts an affable man who gets along with the servants quite well. How recent? Ayumi shrugged delicately as the prince moved to engage, finding no openings in the wooden ninja's guard despite his weapon's superior length. Amusingly, it looked much how a fight would go if a noble were to challenge a shinobi. 4 months, if I recall correctly. Tadashi-san handles liaisons between the Guardians and the staff, or failing that, my father himself. Naruto called that one a lost cause as his ninja ducked under a swipe of the katana. The daimyo, if he was blowing off meetings to dedicate a new Hokage, certainly wouldn't make time for him. His puppet reversed his footing abruptly, stepping back only to skirt around with little clacking steps. A little application of chakra through his strings and the wooden kunai suddenly became as sharp as the real thing, slicing the prince's head right off. Oh, Ayumi bemoaned softly, picking up the two severed pieces of her doll with a pout. Must you always break them? He shrugged with a lazy smile, the first relaxed expression he had worn since stepping foot in the palace. I'm a ninja. It's what we do. How was your chat with the princess? Tayuya asked as he stepped out of Ayumi's chambers wearing a thoughtful expression. He made no indication of being surprised to see her there, casually leaning against a pillar, a stick of pocky protruding from her lips. Animated, he replied after a moment's thought, smirking at the little joke. If this is about your rules, I can assure you I was invited in. Nah, we know all about your little playdates with the princess. Mikaku just thought you might want a little help with whatever investigation you're running. She shrugged, drawing out another stick of pocky. To be honest, I don't really get this whole hostility shit between us and other ninja. You guys are just doing your job, same as us. I'm afraid some of your predecessors didn't hold the same irreverent values, so a bad precedent was set. Although, I'm all for letting bygones be bygones if you're offering your help. The redhead rolled her eyes, snapping the chocolate-coated stick of biscuit with a loud snap of her teeth. Damn, you talk just like Mikaku, as if I didn't have to deal with that enough. A bit more fucking blunt then. How's that? She gave him a toothy grin, twirling another stick in hand. Better, but laying it on a bit thick. The blonde just shrugged. I found being crass situationally less useful than other ways of talking. Except in a fight, of course, then it was a great way of riling your opponent up. We'll have to disagree on that, she shot back, sliding the pack of sweets away for now. So, what do you need for your little Orochimaru-themed hunt? Naruto's fingers, previously tapping against his thigh absently, paused, although he didn't miss a step. My apologies, I don't recall telling the Guardians precisely why we were here. Tayuya shrugged, unconcerned, and lifted her hands to rest on the back of her head. Not hard to work out from the bloody context clues, shithead. What? You take us for idiots? Maybe I am starting to get where the grudge comes from. She grinned, her canine poking out above her lips slightly. Besides, you're buddy, and the little girl aren't nearly as secretive as you clearly are. Naruto said nothing to that, but his fingers started up the nonsensical beat again. Appreciate the offer, but we don't need help. Our business should be wrapped up pretty soon. Tayuya shrugged. No skin off my back, I was more than content to leave you lot alone. It's Mikaku who insists on being friendly. And keeping an eye on us, right? She slipped out another piece of pocky and slipped it into her mouth in a smooth, practiced motion. The way she deftly maneuvered it around her lips reminded him of the coin exercises he still occasionally indulged in to keep his dexterity up. We are the guards for the daimyo, a little paranoia's in the job description. How about for company's sake then? Well, you're certainly better than my other two options, I have to admit. She didn't seem all impressed by the flattery, so he shifted gears. What's your story then? I always find the most interesting circumstances bring people to fringe organizations like the 12 Guardians. She certainly wasn't a Konoha nin, and there was no way she was Fire Temple. There was a chance she was one of those special cases singled out from the samurai, but the calluses on her hands were in the wrong places for a sword. Not much to say, she admitted with a shrug, hands once again snaking up to rest on the back of her head. Orphan, didn't know my parents, showed potential at a young age, caught the eye of one of the old guardians, Kazuma. He trained me on the side, probably as a secret weapon or some stupid shit like that, and when he got himself killed during that bloody coup of his, I couldn't think of anywhere else to go. Naruto clicked his tongue and nodded. So, what was so special that you caught a guardian's eye? His head lolled to the right as he glanced around with an airy smile. No offense. Much taken, she replied easily, but I admit, I wasn't much. I was a skinny little shit living off the streets, but I had this old wooden flute that I'd had for as long as I remember. Used to play it for whatever scraps I could get, and drew a much bigger crowd than I ever deserved. Turned out, I was unconsciously using chakra to enhance the sound. Kazuma passed by one day and realized what I was doing, and the rest is fucking history. I'm guessing that's why I don't see any obvious weaponry on you then, genjutsu user. Her smirk grew. Obvious, being the keyword there. She surprised him by reaching into her cleavage and withdrawing a long metal flute, elegantly engraved with tiny twisting patterns of thorns. Long enough, curiously, that it shouldn't have comfortably fit flush against her stomach. Not the most accessible storage, he pointed out, not too ruffled by the obvious attempt to fluster him. She chuckled, spinning the instrument between nimble fingers. I haven't been interrupted yet. Can't imagine why, he drawled. So, care to hear a tune? She asked, spinning the flute for effect. I've been told there's nothing quite like one of my melodies. His lips quirked in amusement, but he shrugged all the same. Can't exactly say I'm one for music, but sure, why not? Tayuya had already checked the instrument for wear and had it up to her lips by the time he was done talking. Her first note was sharp and clear, as if clearing away all the unnecessary background noise so the rest of the song could go on, pure and untainted. It started slow, a meandering melody that seemed to wax between wistful and sad, peaking on high, sharp notes only to drift back into lower registers that seemed to draw the listener along as if merely a passenger on a river. As it progressed, Naruto's head nodded forward, eyes growing heavy as he began to sway in place. By the time Tayuya held the long, warbling note that faded off into silence, he was asleep on his feet. She rolled her eyes and drew a kunai hidden in her kimono sleeve, twirling it with the same deft proficiency as her flute. With a single, economical slash, she severed Naruto's carotid, or would have, if that was Naruto. Dami lashed out, catching the wrist she held the kunai in and brutally kicking her in the stomach, strong enough to launch her across the ornate hallway. She landed in a tight roll, springing back to her feet with a snarl on her lips. For the record, Naruto said, voice projected as if coming from Dami itself, from what I heard, that was quite beautiful. He had listened long enough at least to work out what the intended effect of the genjutsu was. That's impossible, Tayuya growled, eyes searching every inch of the hall. Even if you blocked your ears, my genjutsu worked directly on the inner ear bones. Yeah, realized that myself, he replied as Dami was abruptly replaced by Inari, the fox puppet unfurling as if from a long nap. Had to block off the tenketsu in my ear manually. She could feel the mirth in his slightly too loud voice. Good thing I'm so good at reading lips, huh? Tayuya eyed the puppet warily, but knew not to let herself get too distracted by it. It was the puppeteer she wanted. I never was all that good at this infiltration shit, but what gave me away? She needed to keep him talking. The longer he was deaf, the more difficulty he would have modulating his voice and the more likely he would be to let his location slip by accident. Well, your story was very good, he admitted, having Inari pace slowly towards the flute user, forcing her to step back. Probably mostly true too, but I'm guessing you've never so much as met this Kazuma guy, have you? Still, word of advice. Drop the silencing barrier after the offer to listen to something you've already admitted to manipulating with chakra. You can't be that paranoid, she grouched, eyes narrowed. Oh, I am, but that's not what gave you away. If you're going to use makeup to conceal your curse mark, you should probably also wear it on your face. It was the same stuff he used to cover his whiskers on certain infiltration missions, and it had been bugging him why he could smell it all this time. Fuck, and here I was giving shit to those prissy bint kunoiki that care so much about their looks. She darted forward suddenly, hoping to catch the puppeteer off balance mid-banter. No such luck, and it was quickly apparent that in a contest of taijutsu, Tayuya did not have the advantage. She treated Inari like an ordinary opponent, and paid for it when her tails came around and struck at odd angles with the force of sledgehammers. She was quickly driven back, growling lowly in her throat as her eyes still sought out the hidden puppeteer. He had to be close, to be able to read her lips. Under normal circumstances, she would have been right. Had she noticed Inari's blank white eyes, however, she might have known better. They weren't just for aesthetics. Naruto had learned the hard way, the first time he installed his prosthetic Byakugan into a puppet, that a dojutsu was more than just in the eyes. Hanabi's transplant had been such an astounding success because her brain is already both wired, and used to dealing with that second sight. The first time he tried to activate it through the shared vision technique he used to see through his puppet's eyes, he had nearly blacked out. The sudden sensory overload had been way too much. There was a reason a Hyuga's range developed over time, and Naruto had done the equivalent of dropping an adult's extended vision into a child's mind. His brain needed time to process everything it was suddenly seeing. From there, very careful testing had allowed him to work out how to restrict his proxy Byakugan's vision and slowly work up. It was still in the early stages, so his range, through Inari, was only about 100-foot radius. Not that even that much wasn't an incredible advantage. Currently he was one floor up, observing the entire exchange from a currently unoccupied room that seemed to store nothing but row upon row of ornate, cloth-covered mirrors. Bloody nobles. He saw in intimate detail as Tayuya fainted around Inari and abruptly filled the rest of the corridor with a hail of kunai. Enough that they had to be coming from some kind of storage seal. She wasn't wearing nearly enough clothes to conceal that kind of armory. Narrowing his eyes had Inari's vision shift, turning Tayuya's clothes translucent and, oh, well, there was an application of the Byakugan he hadn't considered. It was strange being able to see your own face twist up into a smirk from the third person. Sure enough, he could spot a row of bangles along Tayuya's arms, hidden by her sleeves and inscribed with storage seals. If she had a limit to how many kunai she could produce, she wasn't running into it any time soon. Kami, it never ceased to amaze him how incredible the Byakugan's sight was. He could literally see the twitch of Tayuya's muscles as she gave up on trying to skewer somebody she couldn't see and turned back to deal with his puppet. Before she had even finished twisting her foot, Inari was already in her guard and scratching up with paralytic laced claws. Instinct saved the redhead more than skill as she stumbled back in surprise, the last kunai to drop into her palm coming up to take the vicious slash. Before Naruto could capitalize, she forced chakra through the sole of her foot, and how amazing was it that he could see that now, and forced herself back. Naruto had to force himself to stop marveling at every little detail that came up in his newfound visual prowess and focus. How ironic was it that having the Byakugan was probably slowing him down. It certainly gave Tayuya time to turn on a heel and sprint down the corridor. Naruto cursed softly, moving along with Inari to pursue. She had likely figured out, through a flawed presumption, that however he was observing her, he would have to move to keep up. If he was a full-blooded Hyuga, she would have been completely wrong, as he could have conducted this fight from halfway across the city. As it was, his second sight was still limited enough that she could easily escape his field of view by simply moving further into the palace. Not that she knew that, she was probably just hoping to ambush him once he revealed his location. Luckily, he was more than used to being able to focus on two separate figures moving in tandem, so both his actual body and Inari were able to keep up as she fled through the corridors. Also fortunately, Inari was faster than her. She found this out when the fox-based puppet literally sprinted along the wall to overtake her, stopping her from going any further and making this fight public. He wasn't going to fall for that trick. He was under no illusions as to what all of this would look like if anybody else caught on they were fighting. She was the credible one here, and as far as anybody else was concerned, he was attacking a member of the daimyo's personal guard. She tried peppering Inari with another barrage of kunai, this time glowing with the telltale crackle of rate and chakra, but Naruto simply connected her Fuyutan tail and batted him away with the wind-sheathed appendage. Each of them could extend to cover just about her entire form, and she had 9 of them. A flexible defense was always better than a solid one. It was clear the maneuver was more a hopeful distraction though, as Tayuya used Inari's brief immobilization to slam her hand on the floor. He didn't need to read her lips to know she was summoning something, although what exactly was not readily apparent. Inari tried to cut her off with a hail of rapid-fire senbon, but in the time it took her tails to switch, the redhead had pulled her flute back up to her lips. Even with the Byakugan, Naruto was surprised when a set of oversized samurai armor, old and decorative, but no less well-made, leaped out of its alcove in the wall to intercept. Surprised, because he saw no chakra in the armor itself. Though, if he strained his eyes, he could see Tayuya's begin to fill the corridor, emerging from her flute in irregular ripples that likely coincided with the notes she played. Naruto was both deaf, and a floor above her, so he couldn't tell. The hollow samurai drew its long nodaki and set itself in a picture-perfect kenjutsu stance. It wasn't alone, as 2 other sets of armor hopped out from where they had been on display. One of them was actually forced to smash its way out of a protective glass case, which told the blonde that this was an ambush of opportunity and not planning. "How do you like my doki?" Tayuya called out, still uncertain of where Naruto was hiding. "They can possess anything I command to become my perfect, unkillable soldiers." Naruto felt a shudder pass down his spine at the knowledge he was effectively fighting ghost-possessed suits of armor. Damn childish phobia cropping up now of all times. He thought he had gotten past that. Still, unkillable or not, if these doki had nothing to possess then they should be effectively impotent. That in mind, he forced Inari to crouch low and brace herself as the trio of doki moved to encircle her. It turned out that her summons were much faster than Tayuya herself. Inari didn't even have time to finish the hand seals for the Fuyuten Jutsu she was preparing before the three foe samurai lurched forward, crossing the distance in a flash. If they thought numbers would overwhelm her though, they were sorely mistaken. Three swords met three equally tough tails, locking them in place just as her fingers locked on the Ru seal. Fuyuten, Atsugai, he muttered to himself as a compact dome of wind burst out from Inari's body. He had seen how dangerous that one could be after fighting Kakazu, and it didn't disappoint here. In the cramped environment of the hallway, it threw the suits of armor back like a slap from Kami. One was immediately dashed against the wall, the entirely ceremonial chest plate caving in. The other two were sent flying down the hallway in either direction. Something was ejected from the destroyed suit of armor, something that even the Byakugan couldn't see. Or, perhaps he couldn't see it because of the Byakugan. Knowing that it functioned as a sort of sonar, it was possible he couldn't see Tayuya's doki because they were essentially intangible. They certainly didn't have any chakra, which was disconcerting all on its own. As it was, all he could make out was a slight shimmer to the air. He was so focused on trying to make out any details, he almost missed the suit of armor sneaking up on him. He sank through the floor of the room, dropping down into the corridor below, just as its blade impaled the space he had been occupying. Tayuya smirked at him as he landed next to Inari, still keeping her flute up in case he tried anything. "It's amazing what you can do with sound, isn't it?" she said, or rather, Naruto read from her lips. Some type of sonar to flush him out then. Must not have thought he could operate from so far away if she had waited this long to use it. Speaking of, he unlinked his sight from Inari's to confirm his hypothesis about the doki, only to regret it. The thing looked like a hazy, insubstantial cloud with gruesomely large, blue-lipped, salivating mouths randomly dotted around it. Where did people come up with these techniques? Well, he muttered, cracking his neck and pretending that thing wasn't the most disturbing sight he had seen since Hiden's living autopsy. "I think we can just about call that the warm-up." Then he exploded, because of course that wasn't him. Once again, the blast was maximized by the limited space, funneled straight down the hall at the redhead. When the smoke cleared, Inari was revealed to have wrapped herself up in her tails like a furry cocoon. Tayuya on the other hand had simply tanked the blast, impressive, considering it had obliterated the two adjoining walls completely, and it quickly became obvious how. When experimenting with the enzyme extracted from Anko's seal, he had been morbidly curious how it would react with a human. The result, apparently, was darkened skin and sclera, black, tattoo-like markings under the eyes, golden irises and, of all the things, horns. 6 impressive growths around and atop her head, like no animal he had ever seen before, more like short, twisted elephant tusks really. What it did for her beyond the aesthetic became apparent when she blew a sharp note of her flute, that he actually heard. He had to check to make sure the tenketsu around his ears were still blocked. That was genuinely impressive. It was more than just music though, as evidenced when one of her still-armored doki suddenly launched itself at his new hiding spot, camouflaged against the skirting where the wall met the ceiling. It was a lot faster now, but Inari was still quicker. She moved so fast it almost looked like she body flickered between them, tail up in preparation. The suit of armor made a good try of trying to slice the jet of water with its sword, but steel that was never meant to see action was no match for chakra-enhanced, pressurized water that could cleave thick metal walls. More concerning, after Inari contemptuously slapped the suit of armor into the ground with her tails, crushing it irreparably, was the angry ghost snaking through the air towards him. Already somehow knowing it wouldn't work, he angled the jet of waters up at it, only for it to pass through harmlessly. He quickly vacated his hiding spot, not wanting to find out what happened when one of those mouths got a hold of him. Instead, he put to use the tactics so many had tried to use on him before. Go for the puppeteer, not the puppet. Easier said than done when he was forced to dodge the doki while Inari beelined for Tayuya. He couldn't even use the Byakugan, because then he couldn't even see the damn things. It also turned out that the curse seal transformation did wonders for not just Tayuya's musical ability. Inari attempted to finish things from afar with a quick volley of heavily poisoned senbon, that promptly skittered off of Tayuya's skin like she was made of steel. The sight nearly made him trip over. He had seen those senbon embed a few inches into solid rock. The girl grinned at the sight herself and met Inari's charge head-on. She wasn't just tougher in this form, but faster, stronger, and had better reflexes. This time, she was able to essentially match Inari in taijutsu, if not overpower the puppet. It really didn't help that Naruto's attention was further divided by the appearance of her third armored doki, which of course went straight for him. It should be repeated that Naruto, while fit as a Junin, was not a very physical ninja. What he was somebody who played to their strengths. Namely, unpredictability. Tayuya was not expecting when Inari was suddenly replaced by Naruto, the two of them substituting seamlessly. She had been aiming a kick for somebody much taller than he was, and might have been able to compensate if he didn't already have his arm up. As it was, she was caught completely unprepared when his wrist sprayed out a jet of white-hot fire, right at her face. He held the stream for a good 3 seconds before cutting off the fuel and leaping back at the same time, wary for potential retaliation. It never came though, and it was apparent why when he saw that, aside from a slight char to the neckline of her kimono, she was entirely unharmed. The bold smirk she wore told him she already knew this would happen, and was clearly why she hadn't pressed the advantage of surprise. It seemed she was the type to taunt her opponent with her apparent invulnerability. Shame he hadn't been aiming for her face at all. She immediately launched into a rapid melody with her flute, only to pause, blinking in confusion. Behind Naruto, except for the one in armor that Inari had stuck to a wall with Arakun's old webbing, Tayuya's doki were listlessly floating in place, completely unaffected by her music. The blonde didn't even need to be able to hear it to know why. He hadn't been aiming to roast her, being familiar with the durability-enhancing effects of senjutsu from what little he had been able to get out of Jiraiya on the subject. Instead, he had aimed for her flute. It was clearly made of something special, as a normal metal flute would have simply melted under that kind of heat. Still, the thin instrument was now extremely hot, as was any air inside of it. Apparently not enough to destroy it, but certainly enough to warp any sound it might have made. In the exact moment the redhead figured out what had happened, Inari switched places with Naruto again, a swirling orb of energy held above her palm. Tayuya practically curled around the Rasengan as it was slammed into her stomach. Inari lifted her arm, girl and all, making sure the jutsu continued to grind into her senjutsu-enhanced skin, before slamming her back into the floor. Curse seal or not, cracking solid marble like that would knock the wind out of anybody, and Naruto didn't waste the opportunity. Inari pounced forward, sinking her elongated canines into Tayuya's neck. Just to be safe, Naruto didn't stop pumping in the sedative until the reserves in the puppet's neck were completely depleted. If that wasn't enough to keep her down, there was no amount of drug that would. It was, thankfully, and soon enough her horns retreated and her skin had returned to its naturally pale hue. Just in time for Mikuru and Hanryo to come barreling around the corner. Naruto took one look at the unconscious girl at his feet, as well as at the destruction around him, before cursing in his head. I can explain. Neither of the guardians looked much in the way of wanting an explanation. While Mikaku was still examining the scene, his training as a non-confrontational monk superseding any ideas of retaliation he might have, Hanryo was already drawing his sword and advancing, scowling deeply. I knew you were going to pull something like this, he growled. He wasn't the type for theatrics like twirling his blade for intimidation, he was the type to keep walking forward until he was close enough to cleave his problems in two. You have that shifty, scheming look in your eye. Naruto restrained himself was scoffing. As if the mountain of a man had a leg to stand on when his own teammate had been a traitor. Not that he would be believed if he tried to explain any of that. He had found that people's first assumptions were a hard thing to overcome. Any kind of backpedaling now would just be an admittance of weakness in the face of new odds. To somebody like Hanryo, that was as good as an invitation. Thankfully, he didn't have to. At that moment a trenchcoat-clad blur spun into view, landing a brutal kick on Hanryo's side. On a normal man, it would have thrown him into the wall, probably with a few cracked ribs. When Anko continued her spin to ricochet off the Guardian, landing next to Naruto, she found she had barely knocked him off balance. Fuck, that was like kicking a boulder, she complained, favoring her now non-bruised foot. I kind of wish you hadn't done that, Naruto complained softly. If anything, it had only made the Guardian less likely to see reason. I felt I got a pretty good feel for the situation and acted upon my own impeccable judgment. She pointed down at Tayuya's unconscious form on the floor. One we're looking for. She gestured broadly to Mikako and Hanryo. Friends who don't know and are pissed off at us. At that moment Hanabi rushed into view, panting from what looked to be a dash from the other side of the palace. Sorry, sensei, I tried to stop her. She was forced to pause and catch her breath. Kunoichi she may have been, but the Barakuden was a big building, with a lot of convoluted switchbacks designed specifically to harry an invading force. Mid-gasp, her eyes widened and she leapt to the side to avoid being bisected by Hanryo's sword. She would have been too slow. The man was clearly Junin level with a swing strength to match Zabuza. If Naruto hadn't reacted the moment the Guardian's arm even twitched in his apprentice's direction. Inari was there in a flicker of motion, pulling Hanabi aside with her tails and lashing forward with a closed finger palm strike. If Hanabi hadn't been bundled up in the puppet's tails, she would have recognized it as the Hyuga's Hakukusho. It caught the unprepared Guardian in the solar plexus, lifted him right off his feet, and sent him careening back down the corridor. He skidded to a stop at Mikaku's feet, causing the monk to narrow his eyes. That's fine, Naruto said as Hanabi was released from her furry prison. I think that ship has sailed anyway. Show off, Anko muttered. I have seen that technique before, Mikaku interrupted, gazing at the trio of shinobi curiously. I know exactly how devastating it can be to the unprepared. He gestured to Hanryo, who was already beginning to pick himself up. If you had wanted to, you could have easily crushed my friend's chest. I don't suppose that's enough evidence that I don't want to fight. Naruto hazarded. He was admittedly unfamiliar with Fire Temple monks, and was unsure how the Guardian's leader would react to all of this. I can explain all of this if I'm given the chance. I am afraid that is no longer up to me, the man replied solemnly, sinking into a grounded taijutsu stance. Around them, the clank of armor and the thunder of feet filled the wrecked corridor as what looked to be an entire battalion of fully equipped samurai stormed into the hall, quickly surrounding the combatants. Now, are you going to come peacefully? Naruto pinched the bridge of his nose, looking up at the ceiling and making all of the samurai tense in anticipation. Eventually, he flicked his hands and Inari settled into a comfortable Caesar position before slumping over. He, along with Hanabi and a more reluctant Anko, put his hands behind his back and waited for the samurai to place their chakra-restricting handcuffs. Amusingly, or it might have been in another situation, they also placed a pair on Inari, clearly uncertain what else to do with the human-like puppet. As they were being led out, Anko leaned towards him. So, who was it that wasn't supposed to antagonize the Guardians? The Fire Daimyo was not the most astute-looking man. Looking older than his age, with jowly, sagging cheeks and limpid, watery eyes, he didn't strike any of the assembled shinobi as a particularly fearsome leader. But then, they were used to cage, not civilian bureaucrats, no matter how highly ranked. Of course, appearances could be deceiving, and they knew that better than most, but from Naruto's prior experience, he knew the man to be exactly what he appeared, a limp-wristed fop. So, he was somewhat surprised by the cool aura of respect the man now seemed to command. He was sitting in a relaxed Caesar on a platform raised above the rest of the large, open room, yet he had an undeniable air of command to him. This was despite the ridiculous headdress the daimyo were expected to wear. It was supposed to suggest a halo, emblazoned with the sigil of their office, in this case 3 stylized flames. Instead, it better resembled a fan with tassels that dangled on either side of his head. He was surrounded on either side by his attendants and advisors, with the 3 guardians to his right, and the trio of Konoha Nin in front of him. Somebody had managed to wake up Taiuya in the time it took to summon the daimyo himself, a feat in and of itself. It either meant they had an accomplished poisoner at the disposal, not uncommon in noble households, or her senjutsu-enhanced endurance was even greater than he thought. Either way, she was using the opportunity to glare down at Naruto, propped up on one side by Hanryo. She was really going to play the victim through this, wasn't she? We don't even see what needs to be said, the daimyo began, after one of his attendants explained the full story, or what they thought was the full story. You ninja have abused our household, spat on our hospitality and assaulted one of our own without cause. Respectfully, Naruto cut in, surprising a few of the other nobles in attendance that he would have the audacity to talk back to the daimyo. Your own attacked me first. The man's eyes narrowed at the slight. And now you lie to protect yourself, like the lowly criminal you are. It's no lie, he shot back, doing his best to keep his voice level. The chakra-restricting manacles were beginning to wear on his patience, as their effects included a not insignificant ache. She's an agent of Orochimaru. Of whom? The daimyo replied with a dismissive titter. Another attendant leant forward to whisper in his ear, causing his expression to tighten. Ah, another of Konoha's many mistakes, loosed upon our fair country. We find such baseless accusations to be irrelevant. Kitaman Tayuya has been of our guard for over a year now, and her service has been nothing but exemplary. Exactly as an infiltration agent was supposed to be, not that Naruto expressed this out loud or even expected the man would understand such a concept. Then she shouldn't mind having the makeup on her neck removed, to reveal the curse mark there. The what? Another whisper from an attendant. You would try to slander and assault one of my guardians, over a tattoo. From where she stood, Naruto could see Tayuya level a smirk at him, slightly out of sight of her two colleagues. It's not her. Naruto's explanation was cut short as the large doors to the stately room where the daimyo held court swung open, revealing an irate Ayumi. Father, what is the meaning of this? She quickly took in the scene, most notably the bound and prostrate form of Naruto. What are you doing to my sensei? Ayumi, you know better than to interrupt a session of our court. This matter does not concern you. It does when you accuse Naruto-sensei of whatever this is. This man and his compatriots have attacked a member of the Guardians and caused untold damage to our palace. Then I'm sure he has a good reason for it, the girl shot back with equal vigor. Oh yes, some mummery about a conspiracy, traitors and the like. All very suspect, and we will not have you fall prey to any more of his machinations. Machinations. He was teaching me puppetry, not conspiring to overthrow the country. The daimyo's eyes simply narrowed. Ayumi, you speak out of turn once more and you shall be punished. That was like a slap in the face for the young princess, and she physically recoiled. Out of turn. She whispered quietly, and for good reason. Even the court nobles were dumbfounded. The daimyo had never spoken so harshly to his daughter before. Naruto glanced up in time to spot Tayuya's smirk deepen, vanishing just as quickly before it could befall any scrutiny. An insidious thought crept into the back of his mind as it began reviewing the entire situation rapidly. Your behavior is unbecoming, and we wish you out of our sight until this whole business is concluded. Concluded. You are throwing me out. What have we just warned, Ayumi? Guards, escort our daughter from the chambers while we pass summary on these criminals. We think summary execution the most apt for such heinous breaches of our infallible law. No. Ayumi yelled as a samurai grabbed her arm, after some hesitation. Wait. Acting on what he hoped was more than just a hunch, Naruto abruptly stood, instantly earning himself a circle of katana pointed directly at his neck. If this is the last time I will see Ayumi Haim, might I be granted one last lesson to impart? The daimyo's features, briefly startled by the sudden rise, twisted in a mask of bemusement. We hardly think. Thanks, Naruto said, continuing blithely on without paying the daimyo much regard. It's about an important difference between chakra-restricting cuffs and chakra-suppressing cuffs. You see, we use the former back in Konoha for our criminals, because it forcefully prevents the combination of spiritual and physical energy to create chakra. Around him, the swords leveled at his throat wavered as the samurai looked between one another in confusion. What we have here, he wiggled his hands behind him, simply force the chakra in somebody's body to cycle endlessly, preventing it from being used in any other way. Thus the indeterminable ache it caused. Both equally good at what they do for keeping somebody from using their chakra in a dangerous manner. By now the daimyo had gotten over his indignation at being cut off and had simply moved on to confusion, like his underlings. Do your misbegotten ramblings serve a purpose? Like I said, it's a lesson. The catch is, that chakra-restricting cuffs rely on a forced loop to restrain the chakra within the body, up through the coils, down the arm, through the cuffs, back up the other arm and so forth. So, if that loop were to be forcefully broken for whatever reason. At this point, Tayuya's eyes widened at the implication, but it was too late. Her eyes drifted down to Naruto's artificial arm and her mouth opened to call out a warning. It was Naruto's turn to smirk. Too slow. His prosthetic detached from his shoulder, and from the stump, a dozen chakra strings launched outward towards the daimyo. Innumerable things happened in that next second, but suffice it to say that when Naruto next cracked his eyes open, clenched shut in anticipation of retaliation, his head was still attached to his shoulders. Although it had been a close thing, Hanryo's Zanbato quivered in the air an inch from his neck, only held back by Mikuru's hand on his arm. That implied enormous strength for somebody of his slight stature. Hanryo, look. The leader of the 12 Guardians gestured to what everybody else in the room was staring at, agape. The daimyo, although it was clear now that he was not, had transformed, growing thick branches wherever Naruto's purposefully visible chakra threads touched. The rest of him soon followed, becoming a familiar, chalky white creature that gave a rictus grin before finally freezing, looking half buried inside the tree that now improbably grew in the innermost sanctum of the Rose Palace. Naruto wasn't done yet though, and in that moment of distraction Inari lurched forward, having been helpfully carried in by their samurai guard. He hadn't just cast chakra strings at the daimyo. She leapt up smoothly, tucking her legs through her arms, shoulders twisting in a way a human's could not, and used her feet to push down on the chakra cuffs until her wrists popped out. If she had been human, that would have been excruciatingly painful. As a puppet she didn't so much as make a sound. Instead of leaping toward the daimyo, she sprinted away, right at where Tayuya was fleeing across the room. Her tails lashed out like whips, capturing the redhead's wrists and ankles and promptly lifting her off the ground, where she struggled futilely. Further gasps echoed around the room as she tapped into her curse seal, dark skin, horns and all. She had better success prying Inari's tails off of her, but not enough. Her arms were roughly forced behind her back, where Inari used her own cuffs to restrain them. The moment they clicked on, the signs of the curse seal faded away and Tayuya slumped uselessly. She had just enough energy to turn and glare venomously at Naruto. Fuck. She was cut off by Inari's fist slamming into her temple, knocking her out cold and plunging the room into silence. Nobody seemed sure quite what to say as they glanced between the imposter daimyo and the unconscious traitor. At least until Naruto spoke up quietly, sarcasm practically oozing from his tone. Sure, he muttered, leaning down somewhat awkwardly to try and pick up his prosthetic, still attached by the wrist to his other arm by the cuffs. Nobody help or anything. It was fair to say that the daimyo's court was in something of an uproar after it was revealed that the country's leader had been killed and usurped for who even knew how long. Best estimates, from when the daimyo first started acting out of character, said at least 7 months. Naruto figured it coincided with the death of his consort, Madame Shijimi. At the time that had been declared as a natural death, no foul play, but if the daimyo himself had been replaced, then it wouldn't have been difficult to cover up. After something of an exhausting day, the blonde chose to sit out on the inevitable hornet's nest of politics that started up the moment people worked out what happened. It would take some time for things to settle, and then he would see if anything interesting had been shaken loose. He wasn't alone in wanting to be away from the political vultures. He, his companions, and the remaining 2 guardians had sojourned to an empty antechamber with Tayuya's bound and unconscious form in tow. So, Mikuru began, his congeniality strained by the day's revelations. I believe we should begin with apologies, both for our former teammates' actions towards you, and our insinuations thereafter. Beside him, Hanryo grunted dismissively. I'm not sorry. When Mikuru gave him a look he frowned. What? It's not like we knew she was a traitor. Whose word were we supposed to take? Tayuya's, or some village ninja I've never met? Nevertheless, the monk countered, it should never have come to pass in the first place. Our job is the protection of the daimyo, his family, and their interests. And in that we failed. Speaking of, Naruto drawled, a general lethargy to his tone, how is Ayumi Haim? She had been immediately squirreled away by the daimyo's attendants the moment her father's death was confirmed. Coping, Mikuru said after a moment's hesitation. She is a remarkable girl, and is taking what she can in stride. She will be an excellent daimyo once she has had time to process all of this. From across the room, lounging in an alcove window that overlooked the sprawling city below, Anko snorted. I hope you guys look after her better than the last. Hanryo's hand twitched towards his sword, but was stopped by a look from his leader. That is partially deserved. The responsibility for Tayuya rests solely in our hands, but must you deepen the wound so unnecessarily? Considering we were about to be executed for it. Hanabi muttered, more annoyed that she hadn't been able to help than any of the actual goings-on of the incident. I think so. Please, Naruto shot back with a lazy smirk, as if I would let you get executed. What about me? Anko said with mock indignation. The blonde glanced at her before shrugging uncommittedly. Some losses are unavoidable. Anko spat out the window, making Mikuru wince at the breach of decorum. Yeah. Because you had Itza in hand back there, Mr. Last Minute Save. What would you have done if they were chakra suppressing cuffs, huh? The blonde shrugged, leaning back on the chair he was resting in. Then it wouldn't have been me they caught at all. Chakra suppression wouldn't work on Dami, because the puppets didn't mold the chakra themselves. The Kunoichi hummed, unconvinced. You've just got a plan for everything, don't you? Just about, he shot back, swiveling to face Mikuru. Speaking of plans, Tayuya. The bald monk frowned. She remains in our custody, of course. She will need to be questioned and appropriately punished as a rogue member of the Guardians. Clicking his tongue, Naruto leaned forward. See, that's a problem for us, because we need to interrogate her about her boss's location. I would be more than happy to allow you to sit in on the questioning, Mikuru tried to offer, only to have the blonde shake his head. Considering this entire expedition wasn't exactly on the books, they couldn't afford to be held that long. We might also need to examine her curse seal, and considering she attacked a Junin of Konoha, I have grounds to argue she belongs under our jurisdiction. Not to mention, Anko interjected with a smirk, that were the reason you guys ever even found out about her little ploy. Hanryo slammed a meaty hand down on the table, nearly cracking it. She might have been a traitor, but she was a guardian. She stays with us. That's a lot of red in your cheeks, big guy, Anko mused, slinking down off her perch to meander over to him. Had you booked as a straight-laced sort of fellow, not the revenge EY sort. She paused a short distance from him, sliding elegantly onto the table and languishing there like a snake in the sun. She only had eyes for him though. Except that's not the anger of a teammate's betrayal, is it? It's deeper. She pouted, running the back of her fingers up his cheek. Oh, you poor man. She led you on, didn't she? No wonder you were so swift to come to her defense. He slapped her hand away angrily, but the damage was done. Mikuru turned to him, brow creased. Is this true, Hanryo? The larger man grunted and looked away, but didn't deny it. See, Anko pointed out. We can't even trust you guys to be objective, can we? Not with the jilted lover over there. Be that as it may, Mikuru tried to retort, only to be cut off as the door to their small chamber opened up. Tayuya goes with the Konoha ninja. Mikuru immediately turned, dropping down with Hanryo to kneel on the floor. Damayo-sama, they said in unison. Naruto likewise gave small inclination of his head. Ayumi Haim. The young girl sighed in relief, the commanding tone she had used slipping away in favor of the overwhelmed young girl she was, as opposed to the sudden responsibility that had been thrust upon her. Thank Kami, somebody treating me normally, treating us normally. Her shoulders slumped. That's going to take some getting used to. You'll manage, the blonde said, in a tone that didn't so much as suggest anything else could be true. It was enough to make the clearly exhausted girl smile. It looked like she was being held up by strings at this point, which was no surprise considering an entire country had just been dropped into her lap. She glanced down at the still kneeling guardians, looking uncertain. You can, rise. They immediately did so. If nothing else, they couldn't be faulted for their training. And you may also leave us for the moment. Both nodded and made to leave, with Hanryo only hesitating for a moment in the doorway to look back at Tayuya's unconscious form. You guys should start to head out too, Naruto said, looking at Hanabi and Anko. It's probably best if I talk to Ayumi Haim alone. And miss out on the show. Anko replied, bemused, only to have Naruto stare her down. For somebody nearly half her age, he could be intimidating when he wanted to be. Fine, spoil sport. She hefted Tayuya onto her shoulder and led Hanabi over to the door where the girl, like Hanryo, hesitated. Don't worry, Naruto said with a reassuring smile. I'm not going to get into any fights or get myself arrested while you're gone, this time. Smiling weakly at the joke, she followed Anko out into the hall, leaving Naruto and Ayumi alone. The moment the door clicked shut, he glanced over at the girl, watching her shoulders slump and the full weight of the situation show on her face. So, how are you really? He found Anko and Hanabi waiting for him in the entrance hall of the palace, getting strange looks from passers-by. That was likely due to the strung-up guardian still resting on Anko's shoulder, like some kind of prize catch from a hunt. Only the lack of samurai intervention, and their forehead protectors, stopped anybody from doing anything rash. That wouldn't have ended well, knowing Anko's personality. So, the Kunoichi greeted brightly as he approached. What did you and our new daimyo discuss? And why would I tell you that? Because you love me, she hazarded, blinking her eyes coquettishly. She gave it up pretty quickly when he simply quirked a brow at her. Because you're an incorrigible gossip. All that earned was a deadpan stare. No, you're right, wrong shade of blonde. How about because I won't stop bugging you about it all the way back to Konoha? That was a more believable threat. It was nothing that important, just making sure she was okay. This time it was Hanabi's turn to raise an eyebrow. Since when do you check if people are okay? She's an 11-year-old girl who's just been thrust into one of the most demanding positions in the country, and Kami knows none of these jackals are going to take it easy on her. He was maladjusted socially, not a sociopath. Contrary to popular belief, he did have shreds of empathy in him, when Hanabi was around. Plus, it doesn't hurt to make inroads with our latest daimyo. There it is, Anko drawled, hefting Tayuya on her shoulder and turning to head for the exit, curiosity apparently sated for now. Was beginning to think I'd misread you. I also reminded her about the daimyo's appointment in Konoha. He hadn't forgotten how long that had been put off already and how much turmoil, probably intentional, now that he had a better understanding of what was going on, it had already caused in Konoha. So, she'll probably be visiting in a few days. What? Anko asked in bemusement. You suddenly got plans to become Hokage. Kami no, he didn't need a target painted on his back like that, yet. I'm going to try and nail Jiraiya into the position. Now that he had the ear of the daimyo, that might very well be possible. Besides, Jiraiya could bitch and moan about it all he wanted, but he was undeniably the best person for the job. The fact that it would be hilarious and absolutely the best comeuppance for all the irritation the man had given him over the years was just a bonus. Anko seemed to agree, as she burst out laughing at the thought. Naruto let her drift a little ahead, motioning for Hanabi to stay back with him. I think you would make a good Hokage, she muttered once she figured they were out of earshot of the older Kunoichi. That's flattering, but I really wouldn't. Not right now at least. He might make a good tactician, or advisor, but being Hokage was more than that. It was about caring. He was still trying to make up for everything he did when he was younger, and somebody so mired in the past wouldn't be cut out to think for his own future, let alone that of an entire village. But that's not important, I was going to ask if you could do me a favor. The girl blinked, nodding readily. He felt a bit bad for manipulating her, it was a little obvious she was so eager because she felt like she hadn't done anything worthwhile on this excursion, but it was for a good cause. When Ayumi comes to Konoha, I want you to try and befriend her. She couldn't have recoiled faster. Her. Why? He actually blinked at the vitriol. He knew ninja tended to hate nobles, but he didn't think Ayumi had done anything to offend Hanabi that personally. Because it's always a good idea to be in the country's leader's good graces. She still looked skeptical, so he decided to hammer it home. And, she's a young girl who's just lost her father, and is surrounded on all sides by people who not only want to manipulate her to their own ends, but have much more experience doing so. In that kind of situation, she could do with somebody able to be honest and frank with her. That you're around her age is a plus. She hesitated a moment, before nodding slowly. The appeal to her morals was always going to work better than simply laying out the practical angle. It was probably where they differed the most. I'll try, but I can't promise anything. She is the daimyo after all. It wasn't like she could just casually strike up a conversation. All I ask, he said with a grin, purposefully irritating her by rubbing her hair. Now come on, we've got some loose ends to clear up. They stopped a few miles out from Heian Edo, finding a nice hollow just off the main road. It would do for what they had in mind anyway. Naruto produced a syringe of stimulant and plunged it into Tayuya's neck without any fanfare. Her eyes immediately shot open, to an almost crazed degree, as her limbs all spasmed violently. It took her a while to calm down, longer still before she could level a poisonous look up at the blonde. The fuck you shoot me with shit. She was cut off by a sandal across the jaw, snapping her head around suddenly enough to make her choke on her words. None of that now, Naruto muttered. I didn't wake you up to hear your colorful vocabulary. Now, shall we begin? He took a step forward, only to find an arm in front of him. Anko had a near predatory gleam to her eyes as she looked between him and Tayuya. Oh please, I insist. The blonde paused for a moment before shrugging, not too concerned either way as long as she got results. If she didn't, they could always try it his way. Knock yourself out. The kunoichi looked as though somebody had told her the dangoya was giving away lifetime passes. She immediately grabbed Tayuya by the back of her collar and dragged her out of sight, further into the trees. They didn't re-emerge for another 10 minutes, but when they did, Anko was preening like the cat who caught the canary and Tayuya was pale and shivering. Despite having been cut from her bindings at some point during the questioning, when Anko threw her forward she didn't even try to run. She simply caught herself and huddled into a ball, staring back at Anko like she was the Shinigami himself. Took your time, Naruto drawled, earning an eye roll from the satisfied kunoichi. Can't please everyone. What did you do to her? Hanabi asked, frowning down at the cowering woman. A magician never reveals her secrets. She looked down at Tayuya, good mood abating slightly. Tell them what you just told me. Taking a moment to collect herself, the redhead did just that. I don't know much about the whole plan, okay? All I know is that the setup we had going here, well, Orochimaru's done that in all 5 of the major nations. I was never told why, just to make sure that nobody interfered with the fake daimyo, and to deal with anybody who tried. I couldn't tell you more if I wanted to, and... She abruptly spasmed in pain, hand instinctively seeking out the curse seal on her shoulder, visible, now that the makeup had been wiped away. It was different from Sasuke and Anko's. Instead of Tomo, it had 3 even-sided L-shapes circling a central point. Right now, it was pulsing an angry orange, and looked like it was physically burning Tayuya. The moment those markings tried to snake out from the seal itself though, Naruto stepped forward, already writing symbols in the air with chakra. Just like 5 years earlier, he quickly created a containment seal and slammed it over the curse mark. When he twisted his hand, the markings retreated back in and the angry glow faded, leaving it looking like a normal tattoo again. Tayuya panted on the ground, blinking in shock at the sudden lack of sensation. I can't feel him anymore. What did you? This time it was Anko's foot that cracked her across the face, instantly knocking her out again. Damn, that was exactly as satisfying as I thought it would be. We still had more questions to ask. Hanabi complained. She had been quite interested in all of this, in a morbid sort of way. And we will, back in Konoha. But we have enough for now, Naruto said, staring off into the treeline thoughtfully. I don't know, Anko admitted, looking rather sheepish. I kind of regret not asking her where Orochimaru is. The curse mark probably would have killed her before she could, and the moment Orochimaru realizes one of his lieutenants is gone, he'll move anyway. Besides, now that I have an active form of the curse seal, I should be able to come up with a formula to alter your tracking modification so that it can ignore artifacts like it. Can we get that again in a mortal language? I should be able, he repeated, purposefully slow just to piss her off, to change the seal that lets you track bits of Orochimaru, so that it ignores people with curse marks, defective or otherwise. Which, by process of elimination, should leave only the Sannin himself. Oh, the kunoichi exclaimed brightly. Why didn't you say so? Her eyes gleamed with that predatory light. So, you're saying we could go after him right now? Could, but won't. We're going back to the village. He motioned to Tayuya's still form. To drop this one off, and to recharge. I'm not facing Orochimaru at anything less than my best. He needed to improve his use of Inari's Byakugan for one thing. Against Tayuya, adjusting to it mid-combat had only slowed him down, and his range was still too limited for any serious fight. So, Hanabi piped up, fidgeting in a way that made her look like a little brunette Hinata. We're just going to breeze past the hole. Orochimaru has replaced all of the daimyo with imposters thing. Naruto just sighed, patting her shoulder and motioning for Anko to pick up Tayuya again. There's only so much we can do in one day. But make no mistake, we will do something about it. And it would have to be soon. Like with his lieutenant, the moment Orochimaru realized his plan had been even partially exposed, it was only going to spur him to do whatever he had planned sooner. And with something of this scope, it could be nothing good. That will be it for this video. If you want more, comment down below, like, subscribe. And see you guys later.